There are many things which can inspire a love of literacy in people, particularly young children, when their minds are so plastic because they're still forming. But I think video games are an underrated component of fostering a love of literacy in the youth. Because while it's great to be a parent who reads to children, that might actually be the most important thing, as well as being like an active participant in the reading and asking them questions about the content of the story, trying to make it more exciting for the child, and continuing to do this for multiple years, asking them if they can read this part themselves and so on. These things are all extraordinarily important, and not dumbing down your speech in the face of children is also important because that challenges them to figure out what you are saying and potentially adopt some of the terms being used. All of that is great. But while my parents did do those things for me, it wasn't just that. I also played a lot of video games growing up. I like to sometimes say that I was born with a controller in my hand. While I was not literally, it only took 2 years of my life to start playing video games. I remember playing Sonic Adventure, Seaman on the Sega Dreamcast, as well as Pokemon Blue being some of my first games. I also played Worms Armageddon and Unreal Tournament on the Dreamcast as well. I have some vague memories of trying out the original Halo as well as Katamari Damacy and Kingdom Hearts. So, quite a bit of variety there. But with Pokemon Blue in particular, because I had a Game Boy Color which was gifted to me after my brother got his Game Boy Advance, that game was always difficult for me to figure out until I had started actually reading. And I credit Pokemon Blue with inspiring me to read earlier than I think most kids do. I think the average when you start reading is like 5 or 6, right? But I was beginning to read words prior to that. And I think it was because of Pokemon Blue that the words that I had recognized in storybooks that I was being read when I was 4 years old, I could also see in Pokemon Blue and then go, hey, what's that? What does that mean? I think that had an impact. Of course, it wasn't until I was around 7 years old that I started to get interested in like full books. I remember reading Huckleberry Finn. I think it was a somewhat simplified version of the original Mark Twain story, and I read what was it, 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I had a couple other ones. These like longer books that already existed but were somewhat simplified for a child to read. And I read a lot of Goosebumps around that time as well. But the video games, I think, were pivotal in the sense that like I needed to be able to read the menus and the dialogue in order to know what the fuck was going on. And that was certainly the case for Pokemon Blue, but it was much more the case for Oblivion, which came out on consoles around 2005, and my family got it at launch. They were in the beginning install base for that game and got all the DLCs later and everything. And I remember playing through the initial dungeon level where you have to get out and establish all of your stats and everything. I remembered seeing the beautiful artwork when you were picking whether or not you wanted to have like the blessings that a mage or a thief would have. And like I was 3 years old in 2005. There's no way that I was reading, the vast majority of what was on the screen, but I had an interest in it, I wanted to be able to. Hopefully my audio didn't just break. My screen literally just, my screen turned off for a moment because of inactivity. But anyway, yeah, I wanted to learn. because of that. I wanted to be able to read what was in front of me in order to have a better command over the game and understand the story. And in the following few years, I would come back to that game several times, and I was able to actually read what I was encountering on the screen, and as a result, was able to almost beat Oblivion. I don't think I beat it, but I got pretty close to beating it when I was like 7, 8 years old. And that was really awesome. I remember playing some JRPGs as well around that time, which, as you know, have a huge amount of reading. When I was like 6 or 7, playing Blue Dragon on the Xbox 360, which was another early 360 title. All the characters were drawn by Akira Toriyama. I think he might have even had something to do with the story, or was it the writer for Final Fantasy that wrote the story? I don't quite remember. I haven't played it since. I've heard people talk about it since, but I haven't played it since. But I was enamored by the artwork, that Japanese style, and the gameplay style as well. Of course, by that time I knew what turn-based games were like because I had seen my stepbrother and my father play them numerous times, but this one in particular I was fascinated by, and I remember chugging through like a fair bit of that game. Like, I don't think I beat it, but I got pretty far through it. Costume Quest was another one that I was playing, and I was reading all the dialogue. And I don't necessarily know if I would have been reading as much as I was, as early as I was, if not for how cool video games had made it seem. Same thing with the internet, right? I wasn't using the internet to look up toys or to watch, like, I don't know what was around at the time, Annoying Orange or Charlie the Unicorn, right? I was on a dial-up internet connection, so if you were going to watch any YouTube video, you'd have to sit there and let it load for ages before you could actually get on the video. But, you know, such is life. Water is wet, you know, it's just how it is. But I was able to read text, and I'd have to wait a while for my forum posts to load whenever I was refreshing the website, and for Wikipedia to load and these sorts of things, but those were the websites that I was going on. It was Wikipedia, it was GameFAQs, it was later something like PriceCharting.com. I remember there was one, I think it was called Racket Boy, Racket Boy's blog or something like that, where they would catalog different hidden gems and import games for various systems. I remember I used to go on Famicom World. I think there was another one called like Nestor's Guide. I haven't visited most of these websites literally since I was like that age, you know, around 7 to when I was like 10 or 11 years old. But that's what I was doing. I was either going on my e-machine, which was the desktop computer that I had in my room a little bit later. It ran literally Windows ME. I could only read some text online with that thing. Or I was using my family's, family computer, which was the laptop in the living room, which ran Windows XP, on this dial-up connection. And, you dial into the modem and open up these websites, and there I was, like a 7-year-old kid, reading GameFAQs and writing my own posts. Not intelligent posts, mind you, very dumb posts, but I was reading the posts that were online, and I was reading reviews of games and taking a great amount of joy in reading those reviews and getting recommendations that way, and starting to understand how video game criticism actually worked. And I was definitely making lists for things that I wanted to play in the future, finding all these different elements from video games and deciding which ones were similar and alike, and grouping these games that I had found from Wikipedia and GameFAQs into these lists based on these similarities. I had I don't even know how many. It was literally dozens of lists in text files on this computer, just because I wanted to group the things together when I saw similarities. And that was all a result of me being able to read, me having this ability that is literacy, that is to be able to read. That beautiful thing that unfortunately so many people don't have access to because they're not educated properly, or they're not educated at all, or they're neglected in some way, or the act of reading is not presented to them in a palatable, interesting, or appealing way. And I have to thank video games and my access to them, as well as my access to the internet, for how much these things were able to push my reading ability to the next level and inspire and foster a deep love of reading and of learning in me. And obviously, my mom was there for that as well, because she is an author. She's written multiple books, has a background in English, as well as other things. And we had a lot of books around. And obviously her reading to me in this kind of active way, and me getting, my own books and not being afraid to look at books that were a little bit above my level, also had a huge impact. Definitely had a huge impact. But I really do think video games were one of the top things that led me to be where I'm at today. And I imagine that without those, I probably, not have read nearly as many books as I have at this point. I just don't see that happening. I probably would have had a lower reading level in school, right? Because I wouldn't have started doing it as early or as much. So there's a lot to thank video games for. People talk about their struggles with depression, or the loss of loved ones, or how many unique worlds they've encountered in these games, which has inspired their creativity in other mediums, or sometimes the same medium. People have described how the medium has brought them closer to friends and family that they've played with, or allowed them to meet people from across the globe that they've fostered deep connections with, and sometimes, in certain cases, married. People will talk about how the modding community of certain games allowed them to develop a work ethic and appreciate a hard day's work at the end of the day. There's all sorts of things that people have been able to get from their relationship to video games: community, love, work, creativity, inspiration. There have been philosophical changes that people have made as a result of analyzing and being struck by the themes in games like Metal Gear Solid 4 or Spec Ops: The Line, stories which could only be told in a video game that are deeply impactful and well told. And these have had an impact on people personally, leading them to fundamentally alter their beliefs about the world and certain notions that they had about our society prior to playing those games. And so there's many ways that video games can impact people. Alzheimer's as well, in nursing homes, they've done studies on giving these people three-dimensional platformers, for example, and it's actually slowed some of the development of Alzheimer's and kept these people's brains more active, which makes sense given the fact that in those games you have to navigate a three-dimensional space utilizing your hand-eye coordination and actually solve puzzles in many cases. And that's yet another example of the positive impact that video games have had on the human race. But I think an underrated aspect of this, especially in the context of talking about literacy development in youth, but in the context of video games as well, is the reading. It's the love of reading that stems from exploring some of these more text-heavy games that also happen to be really fun and have a lot of entry. I know that was certainly my experience, that those games were able to inspire me to read much more in the future.